I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On tonight's episode, we'll cover Emory Jones announcing that he will once again enter the transfer portal. In our second and potentially final basketball segment of the year, the Gators head west all the way to California, but strike gold with their new hire. Spring game, moving to a Thursday night. Billy Napier announces this past week, and five-star quarterback Nico Iamaleava commits to Tennessee, which brings up some interesting chatter around the NIL subject. Stuart Mandel in The Athletic had a big piece saying that an unnamed five-star prospect from the class of 23 was about to commit, and there's an $8 million, potentially up to $8 million deal on the table. And then out of the clouds, Iamaleava commits to Tennessee. So we'll certainly have a discussion on that one there. But first, Will, how's it going tonight, man?
Not too bad, man. Got stuff going on at work. So, we've been sort of busy the last couple of weeks. You with work, me with work as well now. So good to get back, talk about a little bit of football, get this thing up there. And, no after dark this week for those 100 people or whoever who saw that you have the same editing prowess as Mike Norvell's staff.
It's karma, man. We made fun of Norvell in FSU not cutting the video, and then of course I post the wrong video like 2 weeks, even a week later, because it was technically your singing was inspired by that. So maybe you could sing your way out of us. You could sing your way out of this too for us.
I don't know, man. You ruined my squeaky clean image. So we'll that's good. It's funny. We had a bunch of people who are like, we like more of this. So, we'll see. We're regular dudes who talk about this stuff behind the scenes. It's nothing too off color most of the time.
No, there wasn't anything bad on that anyway. All right, let's jump on in here to two bits. Emory Jones announcing once again that he's going to transfer. We were on with Gator Dave on Gator. I was on with you and Gator Dave on Gators Breakdown a couple weeks ago on the offensive side of the ball. This was something we were pretty much, it's been almost a conclusion. It was a little odd that he even stuck around, but you look at the point of him getting a degree in the spring here, which he did mention in his transfer notice. So probably sticking around to get that degree. Billy Napier was open to having him stick around, I guess, for a little competition. Probably nice to have him around while Richardson was getting healthy as well. And it just sounds like he was a great guy in the locker room, good guy to have around the program in general. So I don't think Napier minded having that experience around at all. I'm bummed out that it didn't work out for Emory Jones, but I'm glad we're not heading into 2022 with any type of question involving whether or not, what his role is going to be on this team, because I think there's opportunities out there for Jones and he should go out and get what's best for him.
Yeah, I mean, the minute they signed Max Brown, you pretty much knew it was over for Emory, because there was no way they were going to have 6 scholarship quarterbacks on the roster. I still don't think they're going to have 5. I think there's going to be some turnover there as well. I don't know who it'll be, but I think there probably is going to be some turnover there, because most places have 3 or 4 scholarship quarterbacks at any given time. You kind of want one per class, right? And bringing in Jack Miller means, well, all of a sudden now there's some space. So Emory might not even be the last one out there. It's interesting. I haven't had a chance to write about it because I've been so busy, but the Emory Jones transfer is a little bit bittersweet from the standpoint of he signed the month I started Read and Reaction. And so sort of my first article that really kind of got real traction was about Emory Jones and how he was going to be used in Dan Mullen's offense and those sorts of things. In fact, I think it's the first real football article I wrote. I wrote like a welcome letter, and then I wrote something about recruiting, and then, why it matters in college football in general. And then the next thing, Emory Jones is committing, and I'm writing something about him. And, he had all of the tools, right? It just it never coalesced. I mean, he comes in and Felipe Franks wins the job, and then Franks plays. And when he gets injured, we all think Emory Jones is going to come in. It turns out it's Kyle Trask. Kyle Trask plays well enough to be a high-level draft pick in the NFL. So you can't necessarily fault him for that. And then last year, I mean, there were spurts where Emory Jones played really, really well, but there were spurts where he played really, really poorly. And that inconsistency was something that meant you felt the inconsistency the whole year. And the problem is that Anthony Richardson came in and was just a supernova every time he came in. I think if Richardson hadn't been breathing down his neck, we would have compared last year's season for Emory Jones very much like the Frank season in 2018, except the defense was so much worse in 2021 than it was in 2018 that the limitations on the offensive side of the ball showed up. Now, that doesn't mean the offense wasn't better in 2018. I think they scored 35 points a game in 2018, like 33 in 2019, then almost 40 in 2020, and then we're down around 30 or 31 last year. So the offense definitely took a step back, and in particular, the game against Kentucky, the game against South Carolina, not being able to move the ball against Georgia, though obviously that wasn't Jones' fault, and then sort of the Samford propping up of statistics because Florida had to put up 70 just to win that game. You combine all those things together and roll them all together, and there's not anything where I think people are like, oh yeah, that was a really impressive season. At the same time, I think that it wasn't terrible, and this wasn't the year that Muschamp had where he's got like Skylar Morenweg starting, and you got Tyler Murphy, and Driscoll goes down with an injury. Like, it wasn't that. It was serviceable quarterback play, but with the defensive side of the ball, serviceable wasn't good enough. Mullen needed elite, and when that didn't happen from Jones, then it was time to sort of turn the page.
I'm hoping what we see with Emory Jones, my hope for him is that he heads somewhere, obviously, where he gets a solid opportunity to start. But you look at different potential landing spots for Jones. Arizona State's wide open right now, in my opinion. You saw Jayden Daniels transfer to LSU there. Herm Edwards still on staff there, even though a lot of the assistants were let go. He survived the purge, basically. So he got a great opportunity to go start in the Pac-12. But what about situations like Iowa State, where Brock Purdy, you had Brock Purdy out there last year. Okay quarterback, not the best, not the worst, but solid defense, a place where you can get that support on defense. Wisconsin, Graham Mertz has been a disappointment as a 5-star prospect. They've won some games with him, but I think if you could put Emory in a situation like that where he could have a little defensive support and you're not asking him, I mean, Arizona State might not be the place to go for that. It might be more like a Wisconsin or an Iowa State. I would be very interested to see how he can fit into in that type of role where you're not asking him to be the guy that, needs to score 30 points a game to win.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think that the Jeff Driscoll path where he went to Louisiana Tech from Florida is sort of an interesting maybe model. Driscoll finds his way into the NFL.
Solid NFL career, right?
He's sort of not quite Chase Daniel, but pretty close to Chase Daniel, making all sorts of money while not getting hit. It's pretty good living to do it that way. Trask is well on his way to doing that since Brady's going to play till he's 60. But so that opportunity exists too. I mean, an interesting one. You think about Levi Lewis, just graduated from Louisiana, and they're going to have a competition there. That'd be kind of cool if Emory Jones went and played for the Raging Cajuns. Depending upon what Napier thinks of him, that might be something that might be in the cards as well. So I don't know that he necessarily has to go to a Power 5 place. I think a lot of it's going to come down to the level of competition and whether he feels like he wants the starting job essentially guaranteed to him, or whether he's going to go into a competition, right? Because if he goes to Wisconsin, he's in a competition with Mertz, regardless of whether, maybe he can beat him out, and that's great, but it's still going to be a competition, right? They're going to give Mertz an opportunity, as opposed to if you transfer to a place where, there's no clear number one, and you come in and you've got the experience. There's an expectation that by transferring to maybe one of the Group of 5 schools that you will have the opportunity then to start right away, and it won't be a competition. So a lot of it, I think, depends on what he's trying to do. And again, I think even if you do that, even if you do drop down to one of the lower level schools or non-power conference schools, you still have the opportunity to make the NFL. We've seen, I mean, heck, we got Malik Willis going from Liberty this year, right? So there's certainly opportunities to excel in a place like that with Freeze, right? Where you've got somebody who has proven that he can do things with quarterbacks, and get them into the pros, but also get them to be effective college quarterbacks. That's an opportunity potentially as well.
What's going on with your Hokies this year at quarterback?
I have no idea, but that actually wouldn't be a bad fit.
Yeah. Yeah. So plenty of opportunities out there, you'd think. And I think pointing all these out, I think that, obviously he's missing spring ball with wherever he goes now, but I do think that's the advantage in that maybe you have a clearer picture of what the situations at some of these schools are if you're Emory Jones. So, best of luck. He's definitely a guy. I'm sad it didn't work out. just like with Mullen. I wish it would have worked out with Mullen too, but I'm sad it didn't work out with Emory Jones. He definitely was a cause for hope. That was a pretty solid recruit when we were pulling him away from Urban Meyer in Ohio State. Kind of emblematic of the whole situation, right? Well, just maybe the face of the Mullen era at this point of hope that didn't quite pan out.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. Again, I think he was put in an untenable situation. I mean, he followed a guy who for, if it wasn't for a thrown shoe, would have been right in the thick of the Heisman conversation, right? If they beat LSU like they should have, and if they play Alabama as close as they did, as well as he played, that's one where Trask might maybe even pulls out the trophy. So somebody playing that well, given all the different limitations that defense had, that was a tough act to follow. And the reality is the minute Mullen decided not to get rid of Grantham, the pressure ramped up on Emory Jones. And we saw it, right? The defense couldn't stop Alabama in the first quarter. Jones struggled a little bit. It's just like his first big time game, right? Struggles a little bit, almost brings him all the way back. But then right at the end, that decision-making in the red zone really came up and bit him. And he just couldn't quite figure it out. There are a couple articles I wrote throughout the season where it was like, hey, you can see him thinking through things and it's slowing things down a little bit, especially on some of the read options and the RPOs. I think he'll pick that up eventually. And when he picks that up, I think he'll be much more effective. I still think the deep passes are going to be a problem, right? The inability to let it fly. And then when he did let it fly, the inability to hit consistently was an issue. Obviously, we certainly saw that in the Gasparilla Bowl. But, hey, he's a good player. I don't think we're going to say he's an elite player no matter where he goes, but I don't think we should say he's a terrible player. Like, I don't consider it like talent unfulfilled. I think he had a pretty good year, threw too many interceptions, but if the defense was a little bit better, he's coming back and playing another year this year. And everybody is happy to see, can he take that next step? From a QB rating perspective, he wasn't much worse than Felipe Franks in 2018. Quite honestly, he wasn't too much worse than Kyle Trask in 2019. Trask took a big leap. Jones doesn't get that opportunity, at least not at Florida. So hopefully he does. Hopefully he does at Virginia Tech, and that's good because the Hokies don't play Florida next year.
Well, we wish the best to Emory Jones going forward. We wish it would have worked out, but good luck to Emory Jones going forward. Let's move on to 4 bits here. Todd Golden hired by the Florida Gators. A little background on Golden. He played college ball at St. Mary's in California, where he was guard for the Gales. They made the NCAA tournament in 2005 and 2008 while he played there. Played for a total of 109 games with 82 starts and averaged 5.5 points per game, 2.4 rebounds, and 2.5 assists. During his senior season, 2007-2008, he ranked second in the nation in assist to turnover ratio and graduated as the Gales' all-time leader in free throw percentage at .832. Played pro ball in Israel. He is a dual citizen with the U.S. and Israel. 2012 to 2014, starts his coaching career at Columbia as an assistant. Auburn from 14 to 16, then takes an assistant gig with San Francisco. 2017 is out there through 2019. 2019 steps up to the head coaching role. I believe the head coach went to Washington State. Took the Dons to the NCAA tournament this past year. Lost in overtime in the first round to Murray State. That was the school's first NCAA tournament game since 1998. Will, you're looking at a 3-year coaching record here. 22-12 this in 2019, 11-14 last year. Bounced back to 24-10 this season. Again, not a big basketball guy on my end. My shallow take is, it sure looks like a Billy Donovan impression. If I said find a young guy who's doing a Billy Donovan impression or a Rick Pitino impression, this guy's out here with the suit looking slick. I don't know, man. 36 years old. It seems like that's the route we're going. We're trying to recreate a Billy Donovan type hire here.
Well, I mean, it's a similar path that Strickland just took with Napier, right? I mean, Napier went up the coaching ranks, has a little bit more panache with the Saban, with the Saban pedigree and that sort of stuff. But I'm not going to pretend to be a huge Todd Golden guy. Like, I haven't spent a whole lot of time analyzing it. I'm sure if you go check out Eric Fawcett, he's going to do a much better job. What I will say is that Mike White, when you go look at his history, he really cut his teeth under Rod Barnes and Andy Kennedy at Ole Miss. And so he got a reputation as a really good recruiter as an assistant. But the question in Gainesville was never really recruiting. It was always X's and O's. It was the use of analytics. It was lineups on and off, those sorts of things. And, you look at a guy like Barnes, he leaves, he goes 45 and 80 at Georgia State, then 172 and 171 at Cal State Bakersfield. Not a ton of success. Kennedy has had a little bit more success as his next stop, going 49-15. But again, the X's and O's were always the question. And that's the thing that I think drove people nuts. And I think you can look at Golden and say, look, it's almost like when you've got a defensive coach or, you've got somebody who sort of lets a program run wild and you have to bring in a disciplinarian. You always sort of look for the opposite. Golden is the opposite. Golden is the guy who studied under people. Kyle Smith specifically, like you mentioned, moved on to Washington State. But they're analytically inclined, right? They're going to take the 2-for-1s. They're going to make sure that they foul when they're up 3 and the clock's running down. They're going to use all those little edges that will allow Florida to hopefully pull out some more of these close games. The question with Golden is going to be, can he bring in the elite level player who means you don't need the edge to beat Arkansas, or you don't need the edge to beat, Ole Miss, that you're using the edge to beat Kentucky, that you're using the edge to beat the big boys in the SEC and the big boys in the country, right? And White had guys like Nembhard and Scotty Lewis and Trey Mann and all those sorts of guys. If Golden brings those types of players to Gainesville, then I think the basketball program's going to be in really good hands, because they're not going to make decisions that cause the team to be worse around the edges. But the reality is basketball, even more than football really, is impacted by one or two guys. Right. You get a couple of 5-star recruits who come in and all of a sudden everything turns around. And that would have happened for White too. If White would have brought in a guy who was a one and done, like surefire top 5 NBA draft pick, then Florida would have won a lot more games, regardless of whether the analytics were solid or not. So Golden sort of, I think what this does is sort of guarantees a floor. And the question is going to be recruiting on whether the ceiling can really elevate. Now, the one thing I will say is they introduced him today and they asked him whether fan expectations are too high. He said, no, a place like this, they should have high expectations. And so we talked last week about one of the problems is that expectations have been unclear with the basketball program, right? That there's a segment of people who are like, well, you can't expect what Billy Donovan did to be replicated by anybody else. We're not a football school. And then you've got another set of people saying, I saw what Billy Donovan did. That's the expectation now. The new coach needs to understand that. The fact that he's saying, hey, we should have high expectations, he's setting that bar, right? And so I think SEC championships have to be in play. and deep tournament runs have to be in play. And I'm not expecting him to win national championships and have transcendent teams like Donovan did. But I think you start looking at things like point differential, getting up in the 10 or 11 point per game range on a regular basis. You don't have to be there every year, but at least being able to peak there as opposed to where White was peaking. Those are the things you're looking for. I think Golden has an opportunity, but obviously he's young. And I think there are questions, but I think we can say the same thing about Billy Napier, right? He's young. He's got a really good pedigree. We love what we're hearing in terms of the program, but got to prove it. Right. And at some point, it'll come down to there will be a result. At some point you play the game. And that's when we'll really be able to determine whether this is a good hire or not.
Feels like Napier has a little more seasoning here. I'm not going to read too much. That 11-14 record I read off from 2020. Keep in mind, folks, that's 25 total games. That's the COVID year. Who knows how many players? First off, in San Francisco, we know what the restrictions were like in California. So I'm assuming they were dealing with a lot of missed players there during that season. So I can almost wipe off that record off the slate entirely there at that 11-14 there, Will. But are you concerned that this is a guy with essentially 3 years on his resume as a head coach? Is that concerning at all? Do you think because Florida is that elevated program, would you have expected more of an experienced candidate? I know your guy you're pushing for is Rick Pitino, but I'm not, which I don't think that I don't know. I would have watched more if Rick Pitino were the coach. I'll put it that way, just to watch the circus. But I like the idea of going after the young guy that's up and coming. But is this a little too raw here with just his heading into his 4th year as a head coach as the Florida Gators now?
I mean, I don't know. I think the question becomes, what do you think you need in order, like, if you bring in a guy like Pitino, and I mean, I said that sort of tongue in cheek. Now, I think Pitino would have won. I think Patino also probably would have done some stuff that people didn't necessarily like because he's done that everywhere else he's been, right? But it would have been interesting, and that's the question: is do you want to be interesting, and are you trying? What are you trying to build? And Strickland, at least when he talked about the football program, talked about trying to build sustainable winning, sustainable success. And so building sustainable success means you can't bring in a 70-year-old Rick Pitino. You're not going to build sustainable success that way. You'll be looking for a replacement 3 or 4 years from now, and you'll be making the same decision all over again. So I think you go with the guy who you think is going to, who has the plan, right? I mean, it always comes down to process, right? What is the process? And that was always my issue with White when you started looking at the analytics. It's that his process for making decisions in terms of who was out on the floor was flawed, which means now you got to take a step back and go, okay, where else is the process flawed? And that's one of the things we've heard a ton about Napier this, in this honeymoon phase where everything that comes out about Napier is all, rainbows and unicorns, which is that his process, there is a process, there is a method to what he's doing. He understands that it's a recruiting business and that's what's necessary in football. And I don't believe that Golden is going to be any different from the standpoint of you can't be an analytics guy and not understand that process is important, because the whole point of analytics is you see some guy sky for a dunk and it's really impressive and you go, wow, that's really cool. And then you look at the analytics and you go, like all of our worst lineups are when that guy's on the floor. Like what's going on here? And, it's some defensive deficiency or true shooting percentage is too low or whatever the case might be. Right. So the athletic ability doesn't necessarily match with what's actually going on the floor. And the analytics teaches you to take a look and say, look, my process is that I trust these numbers. I trust these numbers because of this. And I'm going to use these numbers to make decisions because of that. And I'm not going to make snap decisions because I've got this analytical underpinning. That doesn't mean you never use your gut, but it does mean that you take those things into account and use that as part of your process. So I think when you look at what Strickland has been looking for in the people he's brought in, it's people who are analytically inclined, who have processes, who are going to bring in people to help them, and who are going to make sure that they put their players in the best position to succeed. Golden has the opportunity to do that. Here, who else are you going to get? I mean, you're going to go get Andy Kennedy. I mean, are you going to go get Jay Wright from Villanova? Like, what is the play here? Go get Coach K, right? I mean, he's retired. He's got everybody retires down to Florida anyway. Bring in Coach K. Like I look at it and I go, and I do wonder, because we've talked about this in football a little bit. You basically know 2 or 3 years in the SEC whether somebody's going to win an SEC championship. Based on their recruiting profile, a little bit based on how their offense is and the general team play, but for the most part, it's recruiting. And there is actually value. People always talk about, well, they only gave that guy 3 years. I think there's value to churning, because when you find that guy who comes in and is successful, then all of a sudden the churning stops because you found that guy. And so if Golden is that guy, if Strickland really thinks that he's that guy, then it doesn't matter how young he is, right? Now, if the problem is that they can't get the established guys to take a meeting, or they took a meeting behind the scenes and it was like, don't offer me the job, well, then that's a problem. But I don't think that's the case here. I think Strickland is making strategic decisions to bring in younger people, hoping to hit gold. And if he doesn't hit gold, then 3 or 4 years from now, we'll be in the exact same situation. Really no worse for wear, because churn in this case isn't necessarily a terrible thing.
All right. Good thoughts on the basketball program there. Like I said, we talked about the Mike White exit, so I thought we'll talk about the Todd Golden entrance here, and that might be our final basketball segment for 2022, Will. So we'll move on.
It will be all football from here on out.
We'll move on to 6 bits here. Billy Napier announced last week that this year's Orange and Blue game will be moved to Thursday night, April 14th, 7:30 p.m. He said, we're really excited to announce that we're moving the game to Thursday night. This is going to create an opportunity for us to engage the student body for the first time. We are growing, we're going to be able to get them here prior to Easter break. We're going to have some of the best recruits in the entire country here to show them what the University of Florida and Gator Nation are all about. The game was originally scheduled for April 16th. It's free and open to the public. First spring game in 3 years here, Will. I know some fans were disappointed. They take the kids to the game. It's a nice thing to do on a Saturday in April, but I think this is an excellent idea, Will. You get the recruits out there, get the students out there. Maybe it's a little more of an atmosphere under the lights, a little more of an exciting thing to watch. I've been to some spring games where, hey, it's fun to watch the guys get out and play, but spring in April in Florida, it's pretty brutal on a Saturday afternoon. Anyway, I think a 7:30 kickoff with the students, I think this is a great show to put on for recruits versus your standard, well-behaved alumni crowd showing up for a Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, I think most people don't have issues with the Thursday night. I think most people have issues with the announcement in, late January that it's going to be April 16th. And you're sitting there. I mean, I looked at the calendar and said, that's Easter weekend. I can't go. Like I can't get down there, go to the game, and then get back for Easter Sunday. And that's important to me to be there with the family for Easter Sunday. So it's either the whole family's going down for the spring game or nobody's going. And that's what I looked at. Right. So thankfully I don't have a plane ride that I'm trying to figure out what to do on like Friday night, trying to get in there for a Saturday game. Now, again, I come from a distance and most people don't. Most people are able to drive. So I'm sure there's plenty of people who can change their plans. At the same time, that is inconvenient, and it's a little bit of a misstep, because if they'd announced that it was going to be Thursday at 7:30 back in January, everybody goes, "Oh, this is great," right? It's almost like your boss comes in, tells you you're going to get a bonus, and it's like, "Oh, your bonus is going to be $1,000," and then the check comes, it's like 500. Wait, what's going on here? Like, you would have been happy with the 500, but but because you were told, because you had expectations, that changes the way you feel about it. Feels the same way a little bit, right? So I was a little bit surprised it was Easter to begin with, or Easter weekend to begin with. And I understand why they're making the adjustment. I think it's clearly a recruiting play in many respects.
Yes.
And so that's great that they're doing it from a recruiting perspective. The only thing I'd say is that, this is, so my son is 10 now, or he's about to turn 10. And 3 years ago, he was not somebody who could have sat through a full Florida football game, no matter what the weather was. And so I took him to the spring game, and, during kick, didn't have to go to the bathroom at all until the ball was about to be kicked off. And then on the way back from the bathroom, he needs food. And then you get him food, you get him in there, he just complains it's hot. Like, at halftime, he's like, "Yeah, the game's over. Can we leave?" And you're sitting there, and they've got, all the face painters and all the other stuff that's going on there. It's not hardcore tailgating for the most part. So, that was a really cool experience. Right. And so we haven't had that for a couple of years for people. And there is a father-son component to Gator football that I don't think any of us can deny. And recruiting is important and recruiting is critical, but Florida needs to be careful. I think college football needs to be careful that they foster that father-son connection. One of the great things about college football, it's something I struggle with baseball, because my son's favorite player plays for a team in Los Angeles. So he never gets to see him. Like, we have to record it and then watch the game the next day. Right. But we already know what the result is. College football is different in that it goes all day. We can turn it on at noon. We can watch it at 3:30, all that sort of stuff. Right. He's going to get to see Florida before his bedtime. That father-son connection is important. So to me, I'm less concerned about the change in schedule, though I do understand why that upsets some people. I think I just sort of look at it and I go, there is a segment of the population that's missing out on this particular connection, because I got to be honest, I took my 7-year-old daughter to a Florida State game when she was 7. It was awesome, because she's able to sit through it. If I'd have taken my 7-year-old son there, it would have been a disaster. Now, Treon was playing in that game, so it might not have been too bad to be distracted. But, so I worry about that sort of stuff. I don't know whether it's a valid worry, but that's the thing I sort of think about, is that connection is one of the reasons why we love this particular sport and this particular program. And you got to be careful that you don't lose that. Baseball has lost it. The fact that they don't have the afternoon playoff games where you come home, the fact that every World Series game starts at 9, the fact that, I go around and ask the team I coach, who's your favorite player? And none of them have a favorite player anymore. And you lose that when you lose that connection. And so they just need to be careful that they don't do that, because it's been a while because of COVID. And now you're coming back on a Thursday night. So hopefully next year it'll be on a Saturday, or it'll be at a time announced early enough that there will be an opportunity to have the kids there.
A lot of great recruits in the state this year. So it's a short drive to Gainesville from a lot of the major cities here. Get them up there under the lights on a Thursday night. I think I saw SEC Network is picking it up. So you're not going to go head to head with Alabama on a Saturday afternoon. Ohio State's not. I think Ohio State has a spring game that day. They'll be on TV somewhere. So I think it's a standalone thing. You don't see many games in the spring played at night anyway. And I think you can create that atmosphere. Students can have fun with it and show up that night to the game. I think it could be a very interesting concept. It definitely is recruiting targeted toward recruiting. And I just an interesting change. Let's see how it works out. Let's see how it works out this year. Now, do I think they're going to do it every single year like this? Can't say, but I don't mind the late change with it. I think it's if it's geared toward recruiting and they think that's going to do better for them, more power to them. Good change by Billy Napier there. Any final thoughts on that, Will, before we move on to $1?
The only thing I would say is that they have scrimmages at different points. And if you're going to do this Thursday night thing, I think it'd be cool to do like a Saturday scrimmage or something like that, where you invite out fathers and sons, maybe let them sit on the sideline or stand on the sideline or something like that. Yeah. Right. Like you can accomplish both goals. If you do it well, and if you plan things, and if you really have a good process, you can accomplish both goals. You can make sure that the 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old sons whose parents are crazy about this learn to be just as crazy about it at that age as well. And can foster that, because to be honest, there's nothing better than being able to call your brother or call your dad or call your mom or whoever and talk about a football game where, especially in the divided world we're in, where, you say one word that's a little bit wrong and all of a sudden everybody's mad at each other. Gator football, the only thing you say that might make somebody mad is, I think Emory should have started. and that's not going to keep people from coming around the Thanksgiving table. So I think there's a way to do both. And that's what I would say is that I'm cool with the Thursday night game, but let's find a way to make sure that we're fostering the stuff that's important.
Or you sit your kid down and you tell them the importance of landing a 5-star recruit. All right. Get this kid out in the sun a little bit in the summer, get him trained up, because it's going to be hot if you take him to the game in September, and get him ready for the season too. That's another alternative to those things. So, hey, we fired the last coach because he couldn't land a 5-star recruit. This guy needs to change his spring game to land 5-star recruits. Son, we're going to have to make a sacrifice here. All right. We're going to have to, you got to get behind Billy and support Billy right now. So I think the kid would get down with that, right? If he understood the consequences of recruiting.
Spoken like a man who doesn't have any kids yet. So, if they had an on-field event for my 7-year-old and 10-year-old, that'd be awesome. Like a sideline event on a Saturday, it'd be awesome. I think you can do both. And so, hey, if they come out of that Thursday night game with 2 5-star commits, keep doing it, Billy.
Right.
Keep doing it.
Then you explain to the kid it was worth it.
I'll tell little Sonny that we're gonna do something else. I'll take you to the arcade. Right. We're doing something else. But
I'm gonna take you to putt. I'll sit you down afterward. We'll have a hot dog and I'll explain the recruiting charts to you. It's about time you learn.
If he brings in 2 5-star recruits after this Thursday night thing, there might be there'll be put it this way, there will be many new kids to be Gator fans in and around Gainesville.
Exactly. All right. Glad you came around on that one. Let's move on to $1. 5-star quarterback Nico Iamaleava. My first attempt at this name here. Commits to Tennessee. Coincidentally, there was a story from Stuart Mandel in The Athletic regarding an anonymous 5-star recruit in the class of 2023 who signed an agreement with the collective for a specific school that could pay him up to $8 million. Will, I know we're entering into the age of NIL here. I know we're entering this. This shouldn't really surprise us that this is going to happen. There's a lot of language in the contract. I'll get into some of the details of this, but just so I don't bore you up front with all the details, Will, give me your initial reaction on this here.
I think the first thing is that the $8 million is not necessarily tied to Nico. I mean, you're saying there's a coincidence there, and maybe that is true.
It's not even for sure him, for the record.
Right. That's what I mean.
We're connecting dots. We're connecting dots here.
Well, and whether those dots are correct or not, I think it's important to at least state that we don't necessarily know.
Yes.
I think so. Markets exist, right? And the market for bringing in a high level recruit clearly has money attached to it. If nothing else, we've seen what the black market was doing And the other thing is it's not as though money wasn't changing hands. I mean, I'm not naive enough to think that money wasn't changing hands in the previous years for some of these recruits. I think but now we won't have the FBI getting wiretaps and all the other stuff that they were doing with college basketball and those sorts of things. Whether or not somebody's worth $8 million, I got no idea. I mean, whoever it is worth it because the market says they're worth it, right? I mean, I don't know who the athletic source was. Maybe it was Sliced Bread because that was the rumor coming out of Texas A&M.
They actually got to review the contract that was written up.
Well, and the contract was interesting because you're not technically allowed to accept NIL money in exchange for playing for a university. And so you could take the money and like stab them in the back and go someplace else, but then they would be able to use your NIL rights to advertise stuff. Mm-hmm. So like I'm sitting there going, wouldn't that be awesome if somebody took, like, let's say it was Tennessee. Somebody took $8 million of a Tennessee boosters money and said, screw it, I'm going to Bama.
So there are provisions in this. Let's get into some of the details that I pulled out from the article here. He signed an agreement the anonymous player signed an agreement, had a lawyer, by the way. The lawyer reviewed it. The lawyer shared the article with the Athletic and allowed them to review it on condition that they stay anonymous, that the player stays anonymous and the school stays anonymous. The player signed an agreement through a lawyer with the school's NIL collective that could pay him more than $8 million by the end of his junior year in college. 5-star quarterback, junior year, thinking he's going to leave early. He'll be paid $350,000 almost immediately, followed by monthly payments escalating to more than $2 million per year once he begins his college career. Makes sense. Matt's adding up there, Will. In exchange for making public appearances, taking part in social media promotions and other NIL activities, quote, on behalf of the collective or a third party, unquote. As per NCAA rules, though, the contract explicitly states nothing in this agreement constitutes any form of inducement for the athlete to enroll at any school or join any athletic team. There is no mention of any specific university or that he has to be enrolled at it, only that he has to be enrolled at an NCAA member institution and a member of the football team at such institution, ostensibly violating the NCAA's pay for play rule, which again, we know these guys don't do, right? What did Jimbo say after last year? Jimbo said before he freaked out about it, hey, NIL's been going on for a while. Now we just know about it, right? So this is just a look into the details here. The only specific circumstances by which the collective could terminate the contract early is if the player violates a confidentiality clause or a clause about conducting himself with the, quote, utmost character and integrity. That's a lot of wiggle room right there with those words, Will. And as we know, the University of Tennessee allegedly would never use this type of thing to wiggle their way out of paying a significant contributor to their football program, right? Or should we ask their last head coach about that? I don't know if that would ever go on up in Knoxville. But in exchange for receiving his lucrative advances, the player hands over to the collective exclusive rights. This is an important key here. Exclusive rights to the use of his NIL, which would then negotiate opportunities outside on his behalf. In theory, that could dissuade him from entering the transfer portal, as he would not be able to make paid appearances promoting his next school.
Yeah, so what you're basically telling me is that the NILs are finding a way, or the collectives are finding a way, sort of around the rules in terms of inducements, but putting contracts in place that financially incentivize the player to stay at the school. So all the people who complained about NIL coming in and going, oh, it's just going to be free agency. It's like, well, no, the way these contracts are going to be set up, it's going to be not difficult, but look, when you sign a contract like this, you're going to the school. Like, unless you have the integrity clause maybe is important. Like at that point, once the USC boosters give you the money that you need to go out to Southern Cal, like to turn around and go someplace else at that point, like, woo, Like that says something, right? So they can say it's not an inducement, but it is an inducement. At the end of the day, I think that's the issue I have with most of this, is that we're pretending like like this isn't professional sports. Even though it's professional sports, they've kind of opened up the spigot, like they've opened up the pipeline and the oil's starting to trickle through. But the big pipeline is that TV contract that's sitting back there, that at some point the players are going to get access to. And so this is just the start of that, right? The boosters are, and the collectives, the boosters and the collectives are doing what they can to make sure that the school, essentially it's an arms race between the alumni and the collectives and the boosters and all that sort of stuff. And eventually the schools that are losing are going to get tired of it. And they're going to say, hey, we need to bring the TV money in, and it's going to turn into a real market. And the unfortunate thing is I think in this case, and I think you got to be a little bit worried about the players being taken advantage of, but this does kind of work out from the standpoint of, I don't think you're going to have a booster out there writing contracts for the backup left tackle. Right. And that was always my concern with, when they started talking about paying players, it's like, well, are you going to do it evenly where everybody gets a set sum? And, so still the guys who are, the Bryce Youngs and the Tim Tebow's of the world would be vastly underpaid, while the other guys are overpaid for what they're actually providing from a market perspective. That's actually my concern when the TV money gets kicked in, because once the TV money gets kicked in, then you're talking about collective bargaining, you're talking about all those sorts of things. The players have such a limited scope in terms of their career that I think bargaining with the NCAA is going to be it's going to be like the NFL, where the NFL kind of takes advantage of its players because they have such short careers in terms of the way they cut people in the middle class and all that sort of stuff. So I don't know, man. It's weird. I don't know, because I don't really know where it's going. I think we all kind of see what's happening at the end, but we don't know what the steps are going to be to get there. And, it bothers me that we're pretending that we're not professional while still allowing a little bit of professionalism in it. It bothers me that the fans are, I know Mike Bianchi over at the Orlando Sentinel wrote an article talking about sort of the scam that it was that the NCAA was getting its fans to essentially pay for its players, even though they were then raking in the TV money. I understand that point, and I am sympathetic to it. At the same time, I want Florida to win. And so, given the rules and the way they're constituted, and Florida has advantages in terms of number of alumni, wealth of alumni, size of the school, the amount of donors and sort of the donor network and all that sort of stuff. Florida should win this one too, or at least that, when it comes to Miami and Florida State, Florida should dominate when it comes to being able to raise money and put these kinds of deals together. So if you want to see Florida win, I think this is probably a good step forward. They're in the best conference in the world. They get the most TV money, and Florida State and Miami are going to have one hand tied behind their back just because of the limitations those programs have. And so, yeah, you're going to have to compete with Georgia and Alabama and Ohio State and some of those, and Clemson. But you're going to have to compete with those guys anyway. This should give you a leg up in the state and should be good for Florida long term.
For those of you out there who get tired of hearing about NIL, or I know some of our audience is radically opposed to it based on some of the comments I see about NIL at times, but I just want to point out, it's also complicated for everybody. It's a complicated subject in general. And this is this seems like a pretty important moment in the short history of this idea. This concept, this NIL concept here. These are private organizations, these collectives, they don't have to give any details. So the fact that the Athletic, Mandel got it held, and the other guy that contributed to it was David Ubben, who's the Tennessee beat writer for the Athletic, which more smoke that it's from Tennessee. I think that the details here are fascinating. I think you're going to see deals like this. Who knows how many deals like this are already in place, though? You talked about, Saban mentioned that his quarterback last year as a freshman was already making $1 million. That was when NIL just started. So who knows, if Alabama could be a mile ahead on the regular concept of recruiting, why won't they be a mile ahead in this version of recruiting a couple of years from now? Will so it's nice that Tennessee can finally strike. I think they said it's the first 5-star quarterback in since James Banks committed, which I'm 15 to 20 years at least since that name was mentioned, right? So first 5-star quarterback in quite some time. 5-star quarterback in Josh Heupel's system could probably put up some serious numbers too. So that's a great move by Tennessee to get this going and to be on early side, to be on the aggressive side of this. But they're also pretty desperate too. So maybe they're willing to take some chances that some other schools aren't just yet, without the since there's a lack of clarity around the law still.
Yeah, well, so
not law.
Yeah, so it's funny. I wrote an article this past season about Dan Mullen improving his recruiting, called it the 5-3 theory. I said you focus on the 5 stars and you fill it out on the back end, and that had more to do with time and energy and a little bit with money, kind of wink, wink. But at the end of the day, it was focus on those 5-star guys. Those are the guys who can change your program, and then fill out the roster with the rest of the guys. Because when you think about guys from 200 to 600 in the national rankings, those guys go to the NFL about the same amount. And even when you look at draft position, they end up in about the same draft position on an average basis. And so there's a lot of hit or miss there. So if you get all excited about having a bunch of guys ranked 200th to 300th, I mean, you shouldn't really get discouraged for having guys ranked 400 to 500th, right? Like, it's the guys ranked in the top 15, the top 30, the top 45 who really make your program go. So all this is schools are going to have to decide, or collectives are going to have to decide, associated with their coach, the best way to allocate the resources, right? And the question will be, if you got to spend $8 million for this 5-star quarterback, are you better off spreading that $8 million over 3 4-star guys, right? Or whatever the case might be. I think it's going to be a fascinating exploration in team building and process. And so again, that's one of the reasons why I think Florida's in a good position. I don't think Napier is averse to this. I think he's talked to different booster clubs about, that this is going to be necessary, that they're going to have to embrace NIL. They have someone on staff specifically with NIL in his title, right? The Darren Heitner, the guy who's done a lot of the legal work and this sort of stuff, is a Florida alum, teaches at the University of Florida. So, you've got an expert right there if you need it. And he's involved with the collective as well. So I think Florida is positioned to be able to take advantage of this. I don't have specific information of ways they've already taken advantage of it, but I would be surprised if they haven't. I would be very surprised if they haven't, actually. And so I think there's an opportunity here to figure out, how do you do this? Like, Napier walks into a living room and he's trying to convince somebody to come to his school. This is a new tool to be able to do that. And how do you use this tool just like you use any other tool, right? Nick Saban 2 decades ago, when he was coming into LSU or when he was at Michigan State, had to figure out a way to get Plaxico Burress to come to Michigan State, right? And, the sales pitch is different, but the sales guy is still the same, right? I think that's really the thing that's going to end up coming out in the wash. Is the good news is that when a player blows out his knee, who was a 5-star recruit who was sitting in college for 3 years because he wasn't good, because he wasn't allowed to go to the pros because of the rules the NFL has, that guy's going to get paid. So the Lattimore injury wouldn't be something where everybody's like, oh my God, he's going to miss out on all that money, because he's already gotten some of it, right? The situation with Kyrie Elam this past year, where he's got 1 more year, but he would have been a top draft pick, or CJ Henderson a few years ago, where he had to stay an extra year, but he would have been a top draft pick. You no longer have that sort of stay or go type stuff where the player has to buy an insurance policy and all that sort of stuff. At this point, there's a mechanism for paying them. Whether the mechanism's right or not is something we can talk about. I think the big thing is, I think people are surprised at how quickly the numbers have gotten so big. And I'm not sure they should be that surprised, because the numbers have gotten big everywhere, right? Look at coaching salaries over the last 10 years. People have been looking for differentiation on the coaching side, and the salaries have been going up and up and up and up. And at this point, $10 million doesn't get you elite recruiting. It gets you sort of, Dan Mullen was making like 7.5. Like,
well, what was the slice bread number on Texas A&M? 31 mil, 32 mil for that class. So basically what this story is, it's not the tip of the iceberg so much as a blade of grass. There's a lot we don't know about NIL just yet. And this was if you have The Athletic, there was a great article by Stuart Mandel there. Great look into the background of this, but definitely a marker in terms of the amount of information we're receiving on one specific deal. And again, don't know that it's for Nico, don't know that it's Tennessee for sure, but a lot of speculation that's where the deal is wrapped around, which It will. I actually kind of feel good for Josh Heupel on this, because the dude took a lot of awkward recruiting photos to get this guy. I mean, if you go look at some of those Josh Heupel photos, it's rough. It's they're real rough look. It's not Brian Kelly bad. You could tell he's just doing what he's trying to do. But I mean, Josh Heupel was not built for the camera.
I don't know that he wasn't built for the camera. He wasn't built to be like sitting in a pickup truck with a recruit standing behind him and him sort of like peering through the window, like they'd locked him in there because he was the geek they didn't want to allow out of the truck. Like,
yeah,
the pictures were awkward. I'm not sure. It's the same thing with Kelly. I wasn't sure, like, it feels like that would be a situation where you'd see the thing on the rotating pedestal and you'd see him dancing around. You go, maybe we'll reshoot that one before he posts it to social media. Like, take two. But then again,
there's a second take though for Heupel, so that's just what you're getting. You're just getting.
I guess so, man. We'll see. He's got his 5-star quarterback.
One of the benefits of photography sessions with Josh Heupel, he's a one-take wonder.
It's the same take over and over and over again.
Just like a lot. It's a lot of this.
I like how you and I are talking about people being photogenic. You talked about karma last week in terms of
I don't want to see me in those photos either. The photos after he committed kept popping up with Heupel. It was just hysterical.
Well, congrats. They have their 5-star quarterback. Now, when we beat them, they won't have any excuses. And
they forgot to buy an offensive line.
or Billy decided to buy 7 guys instead of 1. So, we'll see how it turns out.
That's true. What I guess part of me is okay with some of this staying under wraps too, because when the fans get a hold of the fact that this guy is making this much money, and if he comes in and doesn't produce immediately, it's enough pressure on these kids. Like, I do feel, even though it's a crazy amount of money, and you sit there and you just see how it affects people in the pros. It doesn't always go well. Just because you get a top, trust me, Jags fan here, just because you get a top level guy doesn't mean it's going to happen. So we've seen other solid recruits go into Tennessee. Maybe this guy has a little more hype behind him. He's got that 5-star attached to him, but it's not a guarantee. So when you put that kind of story out there with this kind of money, it's going to be a lot of eyeballs on this kid going forward. A lot of pressure.
Yeah, man. I'm looking forward to seeing how this all. I mean, the funny part is you look at college football 20 years ago, it's so different than it is today. And the sport is constantly evolving. And I know that this is a big change for everyone. It's a fast evolution, but it's just an evolution of the sport. You think about back in the 80s when it was funny. I finally we broke our most recent Xbox. So I pulled the old Xbox, the first Xbox off the shelf and put it in there. And the most recent NCAA football game I had was 2005. And I'm sitting there playing the Dynasty with my son. And he's like, what's that? And they showed during some of the games when you're playing the season that only a few of the games were on TV. Right. You're sitting there going, wait, oh yeah, back in 2005, like you had to be a nationally televised game. And, if you were living in Florida, you're like, oh, we got Jefferson Pilot this week. Great. And that sort of stuff. Right. And you think about the 80s and it was even worse, right? Like getting your team and things like that. So, I mean, obviously the 80s were 40 years ago. So that is a long time, but over a 40-year period, this has gone from a niche sort of regional sport where getting to the stadium was the most important part to now a sport that's dominated by television and is part of the ESPN behemoth and is now paying players. I mean, can you imagine telling somebody 30 years ago that there were going to be collectives that came together to raise money to pay players to go to universities to play college football?
It depends on which part of the country they were from.
Well, so all I know is, so here's the other silver lining to all this NIL stuff. I think Notre Dame's going to struggle, and that'll be awesome. They got a lot of alumni.
A lot of money from Notre Dame, man.
I don't know. I think
they're okay with this class too.
Yeah, they are. So we'll see. Hopefully hopefully that sort of Midwestern Notre Dame, Michigan, Ohio State conglomerate goes down the
money up there.
tubes.
Now the thing is, that's what's the interesting part about this story here with Tennessee. Tennessee's one of the first big schools, allegedly, right? We don't know for sure. We're thinking it's Tennessee. This is one of the biggest swings we've seen in the NIL. I mean, wait until more conservative institutions. The Big Ten is more conservative. They take time to come around on ideas. So the Big Ten will figure it out. Hey, USC's coming around. Miami with Mario. You don't think they're going to be like dropping bags on anybody? It's the sport will catch up. We're just seeing Tennessee take one of the first big swings. So that's what's interesting to follow.
And then the SEC will win the national title again.
That's right. That's right. Who knows what kind of money Vanderbilt's got hiding around, you know?
Well, they'll know how to use it efficiently. That's for sure. Use it on a new logo.
They didn't use it to redesign the logo, according to Twitter. Nobody on Twitter liked that logo. I pretty much thought that new Vandy logo, it went from being mediocre and uninspiring to mediocre and uninspiring. So pretty much I didn't see much, you know, people are crushing it. Like it was like, bring back the Star V. I'm like, has the Star V ever struck you as one of the better logos in sports?
No, not even close. It's so funny because like when Florida wore the when Florida wore the swamp green uniforms and they had the gator head on their helmet, I thought I'd like the gator head on the helmet. Like I don't, right? There's something special about that script Gators that's on the helmet. I know there are people who like the Speed F when they wore it with Tebow with the white helmets and that sort of stuff. And it's a change of pace, and the throwback helmets with the F that I like those. Game, those are cool.
That's okay. I can live with it for one game.
But the Gator script is important. And the problem with the Vanderbilt logo is there's no history, and V could be anybody, right? Anybody who's, could be Vermont. It could be, any of those places. And you're like, okay, it's gold and black. All right. There are plenty of people who are gold and black. And there's no tradition within the school either. I would have liked to have seen them do something a little bit different. But, look, I would imagine they did a focus group with people who are interested in the football program and potentially interested in playing with the football program, and they like the logo. This is better than that thing with the star. That star was awful. It looked like a high school logo.
It's still bad. It was bad to bad. Like, I mean, the upgraded the helmet look recently with like some of the script Vandy and the anchor on the back's kind of cool. Some of those looks, they should embrace the anchor more. The anchor down, that's the best thing they got going. They got the geriatric mascot there with the giant sideburns that looks terrifying to children. Like they don't have a lot cooking there. It's not the greatest thing. A whole redesign would be good. That would be good. Not everybody can find an excuse to cancel the Commodore. That's what I would say. Like, hey, you had some controversial writings back in the 1800s. Like, we should find a new mascot. Like, let's do the old Miss thing. Let's be the Bears. Like let's mix it up a little bit here.
The Vanderbilt Bengals coming to you soon.
That would be better. Would that not be an upgrade? Come on.
I don't know. I'm pretty sure anything would be an upgrade at Vanderbilt at this point. But I
don't know, man. I like the whole mascot.
Hey, let's not help them too much. I enjoy the bye week every season.
All right, man. Good episode today. We'll head out here. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Will, you got any final words before we head out?
Appreciate everybody's support. Trying to get these up once a week. Certainly bonus episodes getting up over there on Patreon. Small fee, $2 a month. You can get the bonus episodes of Stand Up and Holler. And we do have some things that we're going to be announcing coming up in the next month or so. So if you're on Patreon, you hear about those early, and we're excited about some of the stuff that's coming up. So appreciate everybody's support. Appreciate your patience. We're working on some stuff behind the scenes. It's taking some time. And so, the articles to the site along with day jobs have sort of limited being able to get some stuff up there, but we're going to start ramping it up pretty soon here and get everybody ready for the fall.
Another week closer to football season. Thank you everybody for tuning in, and go Gators.
Go Gators.
Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel. Join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week. And check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. And as always, go Gators.